October 14, 1943, 15,000 feet above Schweinfurt. Germany. The pencil scraped across the weathered leather cover of his flight log as a German fighter pilot jotted down what appeared to be yet another routine entry. His 17th heavy bomber destroyed, a B-17 Flying Fortress that had just spiraled earthward, trailing black smoke and despair. Through the canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190, he watched the surviving fortresses struggle to hold formation, their gunners unleashing frantic bursts of .50 caliber fire into empty air where German fighters had been only seconds earlier. The arithmetic of aerial warfare was both simple and unforgiving. German pilots could choose their moment, strike from the glare of the sun, and vanish before the bomber's gunners could mount an effective defense. Without fighter escort, the American bombers were little more than costly targets. 291 B-17s had crossed into German airspace that morning, intent on crippling the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt. By dusk, 60 would never make it back to England, and another 17 were so badly damaged they would be scrapped upon landing. The Luftwaffe called it a turkey shoot. The Americans would remember it as Black Thursday, the bleakest day in the history of the 8th Air Force. What neither side realized was that this supposed German triumph would be among their final ones. Within 4 months, everything would change. The Luftwaffe pilots of late 1943 had every justification for confidence. Aces like Major Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, brother of Adolf Galland and Major Walter Dahl, had turned the interception of American bombers into a cold science of destruction. They developed tactics specifically crafted to exploit weaknesses in bomber formations, methods refined through months of bloody success. The standard American combat box formation, 18 to 21 bombers arranged in a three-dimensional web of defensive fire, was built on the belief that overlapping gun coverage could repel fighter assaults. Each B-17 bristled with 13 .50 caliber machine guns, theoretically covering every possible angle. In practice, German pilots found fatal vulnerabilities, blind spots near the nose, limited ammunition, and above all, the psychological toll of relentless attacks. Heinz Knoke, commanding 5 JG-11, perfected the head-on assault, exploiting the B-17's most fragile defensive position. On February 26, 1943, he downed his first heavy bomber, a B-24 Liberator nicknamed Maisie, and by October had claimed 16 more. His method was surgical. Approach from 12 o'clock high, dive through the formation at over 400 miles per hour, unleash a 2-second burst at the cockpit and engines, then break off before the top turret gunner could react. The numbers reinforced German confidence. During the first Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid on August 17, 1943, the Luftwaffe had destroyed 60 bombers, 16% of the attacking force. American losses were so catastrophic that deep penetration raids were halted for weeks. When they resumed with the second Schweinfurt mission on October 14th, the outcome was even more disastrous. 77 bombers lost or written off, over 600 airmen killed or captured in a single day. Major Gashb Group commander of the TU JG-11 developed the company front attack WWII Ninos, approaching line AB Brest, saturating the bomber's defensive fire with multiple simultaneous targets. The psychological impact was devastating. American gunners, faced with 8 fighters approaching at a combined closing speed of 600 mm, had seconds to choose targets and often shot at nothing in their panic. The root of American vulnerability lay in simple physics. No Allied fighter in 1943 had the range to escort bombers deep into Germany. The Republic P-47. Thunderbolt, the primary American escort fighter, had a combat radius of only 325 km with drop tanks, enough to reach the German border but no further. The twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning could fly further, but suffered mechanical problems at high altitude in the European cold, with engines failing and controls freezing. This limitation meant that American bombers flew the most dangerous portion of their missions over the heart of Germany, completely alone. German fighters simply waited beyond the range of Allied escorts, then attacked with concentrated force. Luftwaffe pilots called the point where Allied fighters turned back the golden moment. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, who would claim 206 victories before his death in October 1943, described the tactic in recorded accounts. "We tracked the bomber streams on radar, calculating exactly where their escorts would turn back. The moment the little friends left, we pounced." The bombers knew what was coming. You could see them tighten their formations. The escort limitation created a deadly arithmetic. A B-17 formation might face 4 hours of combat over enemy territory, but only 90 minutes with fighter protection. German fighters could attack, land, refuel, rearm, and attack again while the bombers were still struggling homeward. Some Luftwaffe pilots flew 3 or 4 sorties against a single raid, multiplying their combat effectiveness. The P-51 Mustang's development began not as an American initiative, but as a British request. In April 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation seeking additional P-40 fighters. Instead, North American proposed building an entirely new fighter in just 120 days. The result was the NA-73X, which first flew on October 26, 1940. A remarkable achievement in rapid development. Initially powered by an Allison V1910 engine, the early Mustang excelled at low altitude but struggled above 15,000 Luft, precisely where bomber escort was needed. The RAF used these early variants for tactical reconnaissance and ground attack, roles where their exceptional range and low-altitude performance proved valuable. But the transformation that would change the air war came from an unlikely marriage of American and British engineering. In April 1942, Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew an Allison-engined Mustang and immediately recognized its potential. The airframe was superb, aerodynamically cleaner than even the Spitfire. What it needed was a better engine. Harker proposed fitting the Mustang with the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same 2-stage supercharged engine that powered the latest Spitfires. The first Merlin-powered Mustang flew in October 1942, and the results were extraordinary. Maximum speed increased from 390 to 440 km/h. More importantly, performance above 20,000 TU/ft transformed from marginal to exceptional. The service ceiling jumped from 31,000 to 42,000. FT, the marriage of American mass. Production capability with British engine technology had created something neither nation could have achieved alone. What made the P-51B truly revolutionary wasn't just its performance, but its range. The secret lay in 3 factors: exceptional aerodynamic efficiency from its laminar flow wing, internal fuel capacity of 184 GRE compared to the P-47's 305G, but in a much lighter, more efficient airframe, and the ability to carry external drop tanks without severe performance degradation. The laminar flow wing designed by North Americans. Edgar maintained smooth airflow much further back along its surface than conventional wings. This reduced drag by nearly 30%, translating directly into fuel efficiency. While a P-47 burned 100 gal per hour in cruise flight, a P-51 consumed only 65 gallons at the same speed. When 75-gallon drop tanks were added to the P-51B in early 1944, combat radius extended to 650 nm. With 108 tanks introduced in March 1944, radius stretched to 850 meter, enough to torch Berlin, engage in combat for 20 minutes, and return to England. No other single-engine fighter in the world could match this combination of range and performance. The 354th Fighter Group, nicknamed the Pioneer Mustang Group, received the first P-51BS in November 1943. Based at Botsford in Essex, they were officially assigned to the 9th Air Force, yet were almost immediately ordered to support the 8th Air Force's strategic bombing operations. Their commanding officer, Colonel Kenneth Martin, had only a few days to transition his pilots from the rugged P-47 Thunderbolt to the sleek new fighter. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn Duncan, who would later command the 353rd Fighter Group, flew one of the initial familiarization flights and later remarked, "The moment I lifted off, I knew we had something extraordinary." The Mustang handled like a sports car compared to the lumbering Thunderbolt, responsive, swift, and, best of all, it could stay aloft, seemingly forever. The first P-51B combat sortie took place on December 1, 1943, a fighter sweep over Belgium and France. The debut escort mission followed just 4 days later on December 5th, a relatively short-range operation to Amiens. 16 P-51Bs accompanied the bombers, serving more as an operational test than a full escort. They met no enemy aircraft, but the flight proved the Mustang's potential for high altitude, long-endurance escort duty. On December 13th, the first deep penetration escort was flown to Kiel, 490 miles from base, a range previously unreachable for Allied fighters. The psychological shock was immediate. German interceptors, expecting unescorted bombers over northern Germany, were stunned to find aggressive American fighters waiting for them deep within the Reich. By the final week of 1943, operations intensified as the 8th Air Force pushed the Mustang to its limits. On December 20th, P-51Bs escorted bombers to Bremen, downing 3 German fighters without suffering a single loss. The Luftwaffe, still adapting to this new adversary, clung to its old assumption that Allied escorts would eventually turn back. But the escorts weren't turning back. At long range, German pilots often mistook the P-51B for the P-47, assuming they would soon peel away. When the Mustangs pressed eastward, far beyond Thunderbolt range, disbelief gave way to alarm. Allied intelligence later intercepted frantic German radio chatter, controllers repeatedly demanding confirmation of fighter types and positions, unable to accept that Allied escorts had reached so deep into German skies. Major Klaus Mitusch, commanding through JG-26, immediately recognized the strategic consequences after a December 30th engagement where Mustangs chased his squadron all the way to their home field. He reportedly warned his men, "The air war has changed forever. Our sanctuary no longer exists." March 4, 1944, 25,000 feet over Brandenburg. Through scattered clouds below, the vast silhouette of Berlin spread across the landscape, the capital of the Reich, the heart of Nazi power, the city Hermann Göring had sworn would never be touched by enemy aircraft. Above it, in flawless formation, flew 660 American heavy bombers. Encircling them, weaving tight protective patterns, were dozens of sleek, single-engine fighters wearing American stars. The first U.S. fighter escort to Berlin represented far more than a tactical success. It was a psychological collapse of German invincibility. Colonel Donald Blakesley, commanding the 4th Fighter Group, led his 3 squadrons of P-51Bs on the historic 1-to-100-mile round trip. The group had received its new Mustangs on February 28, 1944, and only 4 days later had achieved what German command insisted was impossible. For Luftwaffe pilots scrambling to intercept, the sight was incomprehensible. They had been assured Allied fighters could never reach Berlin, that it was simply too far. Yet there they were, fresh and fierce after a 500-mile flight, while German defenders, barely airborne, were already running low on fuel. The battle that followed was brutal. The Luftwaffe threw more than 200 fighters into the defense of Berlin, but instead of weary bomber gunners, they met alert, determined Mustang pilots flying superior machines with the advantage of altitude. The 4th Fighter Group alone claimed 15 victories and, more importantly, broke up numerous German attacks before they could reach the bombers. For the Americans, the P-51B Mustang was a revelation in fighter design. Captain Donald Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who would soon become one of the Mustang's top-scoring aces, recalled his first combat in the type. "The Mustang gave us everything we ever wanted: speed to chase any German, agility to outturn them, and range to go wherever our bombers went." The cockpit of the P-51B was tight but efficiently laid out. The pilot sat behind an inline engine that offered superb forward visibility. Unlike the radial-engined P-47, which obscured much of the view ahead, The Mustang's streamlined canopy gave excellent all-around vision, improved even further in the later P-51D with its full-bubble canopy. Lieutenant Robert Powell of the 352nd Fighter Group later recalled the physical strain of mastering the aircraft. Hours in a Mustang meant 6 hours on oxygen above 10,000. FT, your mouth would be cotton dry from the oxygen, your back aching from the parachute and dinghy pack you sat on, your neck sore from constantly swiving to check for enemy fighters. But we had the capability to do the job, and that made all the difference. The appearance of Mustangs over Berlin triggered an immediate crisis in the Luftwaffe High Command. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring initially refused to believe the reports when confronted with proof gun camera footage from German fighters clearly showing P-51s over the capital. He reportedly said, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." While this specific quote lacks primary source documentation and may be apocryphal, it captures the shock that German leadership experienced. The tactical implications were devastating. Every assumption about Reich defense had been based on the sanctuary of German airspace beyond escort range. Training fields, assembly areas, and aircraft factories had been located in central Germany, specifically because they were thought safe from fighter attack. Now, American fighters could strafe airfields near Prague, engage German fighters over Munich, and escort bombers to any target in the Reich. Major Gunther Rohl, one of Germany's top aces with 275 victories, recognized the strategic shift. The Mustang didn't just extend the bomber offensive, it transformed it. We could no longer choose when and where to fight. They brought the battle to us on their terms whenever they wished. The Luftwaffe attempted various tactical responses. Sturmgruppe were formed, heavily armed and armored FW-190s designed to break through fighter screens and attack bombers at close range. But these lumbering assault fighters were easy prey for nimble Mustangs. The Germans tried mass attacks with entire group attacking simultaneously, but American fighters had the numbers and performance to counter even these. February 20th to 25th, 1944, known as Big Week, demonstrated the transformed dynamics of the air war. The 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument against German aircraft production with P-51s providing escort throughout. In 6 days, the Americans flew 3,300 bomber sorties and 3,673 fighter sorties, losing 226 bombers, but claiming over 500 German fighters destroyed. More critically, the Luftwaffe lost irreplaceable pilots. The American strategy had shifted from simply bombing targets to actively seeking aerial combat. General James Doolittle, commanding the 8th Air Force, issued new orders in January 1944. Fighters were to seek out and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever it could be found, rather than staying close to the bombers. Captain John Godfrey of the 4th Fighter Group described the new aggressive tactics. We'd escort the bombers to the target, but once they dropped, we'd go looking for trouble. We'd heave to the deck, shoot up airfields, catch German fighters landing or taking off. The mathematics of attrition now favored the Allies overwhelmingly. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 1,311 pilots. In February 2021. In March 2015, these losses included many irreplaceable, expert 10 veteran pilots with years of combat experience. American losses, while significant, could be replaced by the massive training programs producing 11,000 new pilots monthly. The P-51 represented more than just extended range. It showcased American industrial and technological superiority. The K-14 computing gun sight introduced in late 1944 gave Mustang pilots a significant advantage in deflection shooting. This gyroscopic sight automatically calculated lead based on range and rate of turn, dramatically improving accuracy. The Mustang's 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, while less powerful than German cannon, offered advantages in ammunition capacity and rate of fire. A P-51 carried 1,880 rounds total, enough for nearly 30 seconds of continuous fire. German fighters armed with cannon typically carried ammunition for less than 10 seconds of fire. In a prolonged dogfight, American pilots could afford to take shots. German pilots couldn't. Major Heinz Baer, one of Germany's top aces with 220 victories, noted the qualitative difference. The Mustang was not just another fighter. It was a weapons system. Everything about it was optimized for its mission. We had excellent aircraft, but nothing that combined all elements so effectively. Behind the statistics lay human tragedy on an unprecedented scale. Young men on both sides, many barely out of their teens, fought desperate battles 6 meters above the earth in temperatures of minus 5th degree UNAF. The lucky ones died instantly. Others endured horrific burns, traumatic amputations from cannon shells, or slow deaths in parachutes riddled with bullet holes. Lieutenant William Wisner of the 352nd Fighter Group shot down a Bf-109 on March 8, 1944, and watched its pilot bail out. His parachute opened, but he was on fire. I could see him trying to beat out flames on his flight suit as he descended. There was nothing anyone could do. German pilot Walter Schuck of JG-7 described the changing nature of combat. In 1943, we were knights of the air, jousting with bombers in something approaching fair combat. By 1944, we were being pursued relentlessly. Mustangs would follow us down to our airfields, circle overhead while we tried to land, then attack. There was no safety anywhere. The psychological toll was devastating. Luftwaffe pilots who had been confident in 1943 became increasingly fatalistic by mid-1944. Letters. Home censored by German authorities but preserved in archives revealed deepening despair. One pilot wrote in April 1944, "We take off knowing most of us won't return. The Americans are everywhere, always above us, always with more fuel, more ammunition." As spring turned to summer in 1944, the Mustang's range enabled a strategic campaign that would the German war machine, a systematic destruction of oil production. Synthetic oil plants at Lower, Pulitz, and Brooks, previously beyond escort range, now faced regular precision attacks with full fighter protection. The impact was catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. Aviation fuel production fell from 175,000 tons in April 1944 to 30,000 tons in July and just 10,000 tons in September. Training flights were curtailed, then eliminated entirely. New pilots arrived at combat units with ACEFU as 50 hours total flight time, compared to American pilots with 300 to 400 hours. Obus Johannes Steinhoff, commanding JG-7, described the crisis. "We had the world's first operational jet fighter, the M262, capable of 540 mph, but we could barely fuel them for combat missions. I watched helplessly as dozens of these superb aircraft sat idle while Mustangs roamed freely overhead." June 6, 1944 demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties over France compared to 14,674 Allied sorties. Only 2 German fighters appeared over the invasion beaches. Mustangs and other Allied fighters had established such dominance that the invasion proceeded under an aerial umbrella virtually unchallenged by German aviation. Oberstleutnant E.Sef Pips Prill, commanding JG-26, flew one of those 2 sorties with his wingman, Unoffizier Heinz Wodacek, making a single strafing run along Sword Beach. Prill later described the mission as suicide disguised as duty. They survived only because Allied fighters were too surprised to react. To the lone pair of FW-190, the Mustang's role extended beyond escort to active fighter bombing. P-51 pilots became adept at train busting, destroying locomotives with their .050 caliber guns. A single Mustang could carry 2 500 LB bombs or 10 5-in rockets in addition to its guns, making it a formidable ground attack aircraft. Captain Charles Chuck Yeager, who would later break the sound barrier, flew P-51s with the 357th Fighter Group. On October 12, 1944, he shot down 5 Bf-10-9s in a single mission. But he also described the moral complexity. "We went from protecting bombers to attacking anything that moved. We'd strafe trains knowing they might be carrying civilians. It was total war, and the Mustang gave us the capability to take that war anywhere in Germany." Germany's technological response came in the form of revolutionary jet fighters. The Messerschmitt Mi-262 and the rocket-powered Mi-163 Comet. The Mi-262, capable of 540 mph, was nearly 100 mph faster than the P-51D. In the hands of experienced pilots, it could slash through bomber formations and escape before Mustangs could react. Yet, even these technological marvels couldn't reverse the tide. Adolf Galland, flying a Mi-262 with JV-44 in 1945, shot down 7 aircraft but recognized the futility. We were like a few tigers facing hundreds of wolves. For every Mi-262, the Americans had 50 Mustangs, and Mustangs could loiter over our airfields, attacking jets when they were most vulnerable during takeoff and landing. The jet engines of 1944 to 45 were temperamental, requiring careful throttle management and long runways. Mustang pilots learned to exploit these weaknesses. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 361 Fighter Group shot down 2 Mi-262s on October 7, 1944 by catching them in the landing pattern. The jets, low on fuel and with throttles reduced for landing, were helpless against the diving Mustangs. By early 1945, the arithmetic of air combat had become impossible for Germany. The United States produced 15,486 P-51s during the war, with approximately 8,000 serving in Europe. At peak strength in March 1945, the 8th Air Force alone operated 14 fighter groups equipped primarily with Mustangs, over 1,000 aircraft. Against this, the Luftwaffe could muster perhaps 300 to 400 serviceable fighters in any given day, scattered across the entire Reich. Fuel shortages meant many never flew. Pilot shortages meant those that did were often manned by teenagers with minimal training. The kill ratios reflected this imbalance. By 1945, Mustang pilots were claiming 10 victories for every loss. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer, commanding the 352nd Fighter Group, ended the war with 24 aerial victories, all in Mustangs. He observed, "By 1945, it wasn't combat, it was execution. We'd find German airfields, circle overhead, and shoot down anyone who tried to take off or land. The Mustang had made all of Germany a combat zone." After the war, captured Luftwaffe pilots provided revealing testimony about the Mustang's impact. General der Jagdflieger Adolf Galland in his memoirs wrote, "The P-51 was perhaps the most significant fighter aircraft of World War II. Until it appeared, we had controlled the timing and tempo of air battles over Germany. After it arrived, we never regained the initiative." Major Heinz Knoke, who survived the war with 33 victories, was more blunt. "The Mustang killed the Luftwaffe. Not the bomber offensive, not the invasion, but that fighter that could fly to Poland and back. We went from predators to prey in the span of 3 months." Perhaps most poignant was the testimony of younger pilots who entered combat late in the war. They flew their first missions with minimal training, facing experienced American pilots in superior aircraft. One captured pilot stated, "I flew my first combat mission in November 1944 with 55 hours total flight time. On my third mission, I saw Mustangs for the first time. They were everywhere. I knew then that we had lost not just the war, but the sky itself. The sky itself." The Mustang's contribution extended far beyond tactical victories. By enabling deep penetration raids with acceptable losses, it allowed the systematic destruction of German industry. Oil production, the Weimar's Achilles heel, was reduced to 10% of requirements by March 1945. The transportation network was shattered, preventing movement of troops, supplies, and raw materials. Aircraft production, though maintained at high levels through dispersal, became meaningless when there was no fuel to fly the planes or trained pilots to man them. General Carl Spaatz, commanding United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, stated, "The P-51 was the decisive weapon system of the European air war. It made possible the daylight bombing campaign, the invasion of Europe, and the systematic destruction of German military power. Beyond strategic impacts lay profound human transformation. German pilots who had entered combat in 1943 as confident warriors emerged from the war, if they survived, as changed men. Many spoke of specific moments when they realized the war was lost, almost always connected to their first encounter with Mustangs deep over Germany. Some German pilots experienced a different transformation from enemy to admirer. Many Luftwaffe veterans, after witnessing American material superiority and humane treatment of prisoners, questioned everything they had been told about their enemies. The contrast between Nazi propaganda and reality proved devastating to morale and ideology alike. The P-51 represented a watershed in fighter design, influencing aircraft development for decades. Its laminar flow wing demonstrated the potential for dramatic drag reduction. The integration of British engine technology with American airframe design established a model for international cooperation that would continue through NATO and other alliances. The Mustang's range achievement changed fundamental assumptions about fighter aircraft. Pre-war doctrine held that fighters were short-range point defense weapons. The P-51 proved that fighters could be strategic weapons capable of projecting power hundreds of miles from base. This concept would influence everything from the F-86 Sabre in Korea to modern fighters capable of global deployment with aerial refueling. The final statistics of the Mustang's impact are staggering. Total Mustangs produced 15,486 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat. Europe, 4,950 enemy aircraft destroyed on ground. 4,131 locomotives destroyed 9,154 combat sorties over 213,873 combat hours over 1 to 34,420 operational. Losses 25-20. The kill-to-loss ratio in air. Combat exceeded 11-1. Unprecedented in aerial warfare. But the true impact can't be measured in statistics alone. The Mustang broke the Luftwaffe's will to fight, enabled the invasion of Europe, and shortened the war by months, if not years. The transformation from German laughter at unescorted bombers to complete aerial impotence occurred with stunning rapidity. In October 1943, the Luftwaffe controlled the skies over Germany, shooting down bombers at will. By March 1944, Mustangs were escorting bombers to Berlin. By June 1944, the Luftwaffe was combat ineffective. By April 1945, Yeager ceased to exist as a fighting force. This transformation wasn't gradual. It was catastrophic. The Luftwaffe didn't slowly decline. It collapsed. The appearance of Mustangs deep over Germany triggered a cascade of defeats from which recovery proved impossible. Each lost pilot couldn't be adequately replaced. Each destroyed aircraft reduced training capability. Each successful escort mission emboldened Allied planners to strike deeper, harder, more frequently. German pilot losses tell the story. 1943, 2,967 pilots lost. 1944, 12,037 pilots lost. 1945, January to May, 4,138 pilots lost. Average pilot experience plummeted. 1943, 250-plus flight hours before combat. Early 1944, then 150 hours. Late 1944, 80 hours. 1945 and 40 to 50 hours. Perhaps the Mustang's greatest achievement was psychological. It shattered the myth of German technological superiority, demonstrated American industrial capability, and proved that democracy could produce better weapons than dictatorship. German pilots who had laughed at American bombers in 1943 were by 1945 refusing to fly suicide missions against Mustang escorted formations. Young Luftwaffe pilots indoctrinated in Nazi ideology experienced cognitive dissonance when confronting American material superiority. Everything they had been taught about racial superiority, about German technical prowess, about American weakness, was contradicted by the elegant, powerful fighter that dominated their own homeland. In 1985, 40 years after the war's end, American and German fighter pilots met at a reunion in San Antonio, Texas. The conversations revealed the lasting impact of the Mustang on both sides. Colonel Clarence Bud Anderson, who flew 116 combat missions in Mustangs and scored 16.225 aerial victories, sat across from Gay, Germany's third highest-scoring ace, raised his glass and said, "To the P-51 Mustang, the fighter that won the air war. We had excellent aircraft, superb pilots, and were fighting over our homeland. But you had the Mustang, and that made all the difference. Walter Schuck, who had transitioned from FW-190S to Me-262 jets, added, "We went from laughing at unescorted bombers to taking cover from Mustangs in just 4 months. No military force has ever experienced such a complete reversal." Former Luftwaffe General Johannes Steinhoff, his face still bearing scars from his Mi-262 crash in April 1945, reflected, "We laughed at your bombers in 1943 because we could not imagine that America could produce a fighter with the range to escort them to Berlin." The P-51 Mustang taught us the danger of underestimating one's enemies. You ask when we knew the war was lost. It was that day in March 1944 when we looked up and saw Mustangs over Berlin. At that moment, every German pilot knew the truth. We had already lost. The transformation from German pilots laughing at unescorted American bombers to cowering from Mustang fighters represents one of the most complete reversals in military history. In less than 6 months, from October 1943 to March 1944, the Luftwaffe went from dominant to defeated, from predator to prey, from confident to condemned. The P-51 Mustang was the spark that ignited this transformation, but it stood for far more than a single aircraft. It embodied American industrial power, democratic cooperation among allies, and the creative force of technological innovation born from necessity rather than ideology. German aviators, long taught that American democracy was a weakness, instead found themselves confronting a society capable of unmatched unity, ingenuity, and production. Their laughter in October 1943 had been rooted in reason, in the firm belief that technical limits were unbreakable. No single-engine fighter had ever achieved the endurance to escort bombers from England to Berlin and return. What they failed to foresee was American problem-solving brilliance, the seamless fusion of British engineering and American manufacturing, and an industrial base powerful enough to deliver thousands of exceptional aircraft in mere months instead of years. When the Mustangs appeared above Berlin on March 4, 1944, the laughter ceased forever. In its place came a grim understanding. Everything they had believed about their enemies, their own superiority, and the war's outcome had been false. The P-51 Mustang did more than win the air war. It shattered illusions, demolished myths, and proved that superiority in modern conflict arises not from ideology, but from the union of industry, cooperation, and democratic innovation. Those German pilots who survived never forgot. In their memoirs, interviews, and reunions, they consistently pointed to the moment Mustangs appeared over Germany as the instant they knew the war was lost. Not on the beaches of Normandy, nor in the ruins of Berlin, but when American fighters reached the heart of the Reich with enough fuel left to fight. 79 years later, the P-51 Mustang remains the enduring emblem of American air dominance in World War II, the aircraft that silenced laughter and ended the Reich's illusion of control over its skies. The pilots who laughed in 1943 learned by March 1944 that their confidence had been misplaced. By May 1945, most were gone, their arrogance erased by the very weapon they once dismissed. In the end, the Mustang's story stands as a warning, a testament to the peril of underestimating one's foes, the strength of industrial democracy, and the world-changing effect a single innovation can bring. The Mustang proved that in modern industrial warfare, bravery and skill, though vital, are not enough. Victory belongs to those who can build faster, train better, and innovate beyond all limits. The transformation was total, irreversible, and devastating. The laughter had turned to silence, and across the skies of Europe, the P-51 Mustang had written its legacy as the fighter that ended the Luftwaffe's reign, and with it, Nazi Germany's last hope of victory.